Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. My name's Kris. In this short tutorial, I'm going to show you how I painted this painting of cornflowers. Cornflowers are known for their intense blue color, their long green stems, and their kind of wild array of petals. Here's the reference image I used for this painting. You can see there's only one primary flower in this reference image, so I used my artistic license and made several flowers and arranged them in a nice composition. Okay, if this sounds interesting to you, let's get started. One of the first things I do when I'm preparing for a new painting is to do a quick sketch in my sketchbook. So this is not watercolor paper, it's just a sketchbook. Take out a graphite pencil and do a quick study like this. I find that very helpful, and I really encourage you to consider doing that as well. Helps you work out your composition. Now I've moved to my watercolor paper and I'm drawing freehand from observation of a photograph my composition. Again, using the study I just did, the sketch, and also the reference image together, I'm creating this composition. Again, the copyright-free image, it was from unsplash.com, and you'll find a link to it in the description below. I've taken a lot of artistic license here and changed up the composition quite a bit, adding more flowers, putting them in a pleasing composition, and I sketched them onto my paper. I probably sketched them a little darker than I normally would, but I just wanted you to be able to see it here in the video. All right, I've changed the tilt in my board, my easel, so I can get a little bit of a tilt to the paper, and that helps with gravity for the water to kind of flow down from the top to the bottom of the painting. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is mix up my green. Here are my primary colors I'm using. I'm trying to use just 3 colors in this painting. My primary colors are French ultramarine, nickel quinacridone gold, that's my yellow, and Quinacridone Lilac for my red color. And I'm mixing that green up here. Okay, I have a very thin mixture of my green, which again is a combination of the ultramarine blue and the gold. And the consistency of the paint at this point is like tea. And so I'm getting a very light application of the color. I'm primarily applying the paint in a diagonal direction from the lower right to the upper left. So you can see here, that's primarily because I want it to look like the grass in the background. It's all kind of going in one direction. Mixing up a slightly darker green by adding a bit more blue. And so I get a variegated array of colors and values in the background. Again, it's still very light. I'm not wanting to apply it too dark. I'm going to keep the center area of the background the lightest, okay? Because I'm trying to get the sense of like light coming from behind the flowers. And so I want that area right behind the flowers to be quite light in value. But I also want the corners to be darker. So I'm taking my ultramarine blues, French ultramarine, and mixing in a little bit darker application of the paint. So maybe the consistency is more like coffee now instead of tea. And I'm putting some of that blue in the corners. I decided it was a little bit too dark at that point. So I came back with a mixture of mixing in more of the gold here with that blue. Now you can see I'm really mixing it on the paper. So the gold with the blue is now giving me a golden colored green, which is really the primary color I'm using in the background. I'm trying to avoid where the stems are, so kind of not really painting over those areas, but otherwise just painting again in that diagonal way from lower right to upper left. And just this is all being painted in a wet on wet fashion, so it's going to spread out. It's going to be very soft in the edges. It's going to be very abstract, very loose. Really, you can't tell that you really can't tell what's in the background. It's just a kind of a soft mix of colors, which is what I want. Now, I've come back with my just my blue now on my brush. Again, I think this is a number 12 silver black velvet brush. And I've got just the blue, and again, more of a coffee consistency to the paint and water on the brush. And I'm going to give the shape, the general shape of the first flower. At this point, I am painting wet on wet. Remember, at the very beginning of the painting process, I wet the paper with water, clean water. And so the paper is still fairly damp throughout. And so as I lay down this paint, it's going to spread out, and the edges of these blue flowers are going to be very soft, which is what I wanted. This is considered the first wash, and it's really the establishment of the undertones in the painting. Now I've taken for the first time my Quinacridone Lilac, which is my red color, and there's one small bud of a flower in the background that has a real pink tone to it. And so I've applied that color here to that flower. And it's really going to stand out, creating a contrast of colors compared to the blue flowers. Part of that bud is also blue. It kind of mixes the red and blue together to create kind of a purple color. And so I've added the blue. Now taking this bluer color and starting down the stems of each of the flowers. And again, the stems, especially as they get near to the actual flower, are fairly dark, and then they get more green as they move away from the actual flowers. Now I've taken a mixture of the French ultramarine and Quinacridone Lilac to make a fairly strong purple, and I'm emphasizing the shadow areas on the stem and on the areas below the flower. Now be aware at this point the paper is still damp. This is still considered the first wash. And so I'm being very careful at this point. The paper is in the danger zone because it's still damp. I don't want to put too much water on my brush at this point. So instead I have fairly thick pigment on the brush, kind of more of a cream consistency. And now I'm using the nickel quinacridone gold to emphasize the stems. And you can see that it's still a little damp because the color is starting to spread out into the paper just a little bit because it's still damp. Now I want to emphasize the detail in the flowers a bit more. So again, with my French ultramarine, a thicker mixture now, more like a whole milk consistency of paint. I'm coming back in when touching along the underside of each of the flowers, which is the darkest area of the flowers, the part that's furthest from the light source. And you can see how that's kind of darkening the flowers all throughout there. Coming also, and now with a mixture of my blue and gold, I've got a nice green again, and I'm emphasizing the stems. Here's the painting done at this stage in the painting. I'm kind of focusing in. You can see the granulating of the French ultramarine and the other colors. As this is now drying, I'm going to allow it to dry before I go on to the next step. Now it's time to emphasize the details in the flowers. So I have mixed up the lilac and blue with more of a reddish tone to it. So it's a kind of a very reddish purple. And I'm taking that paint and just with the side of my brush, laying the side of the brush down on the paper and applying this different tone to the petals. At this point, I have allowed the paper to dry completely, so I'm moved past the first wash and I'm into the second stage where I'm applying darker pigment, great darker values, and emphasizing the details of the flower a bit more. I've loaded my brush with a bit more of the Quinacridone Lilac, and I'm emphasizing the bud there in the upper right and some of the petals. I find that when I add some pink or reddish tone to my blue, this is going to help me emphasize some of the lighter areas of the petals. Even though I'm not painting, I haven't retained white in this area for highlights, I can give the sense of that light tone by adding some pink, or in this case lilac, to the blue tones of the flower. Just loosely laying down streaks and marks and laying down the side of the brush on the paper. I'm attempting or looking to create a loose, more impressionist style to this flower as opposed to being photorealistic. Now I'm just continuing the process of adding details To the flower, I've added, again, I've got my Quinacridone Lilac, adding some pink shadow areas below the flower areas. This is glazing at this point because I'm taking transparent paint and applying that over other areas of the painting that are already dry. I'm doing it with a very soft brush. It is possible when you glaze that you could disturb the previous layers, so you have to be careful with that. Now with my French ultramarine, I'm using a very fine tip brush. This is my Princeton Aqua Elite Round number 12. Beautiful brush, really fine point. And I'm taking that blue and just putting in the details of the flower. The heads of these flowers and the petals are kind of a real wild flurry of petals going in all directions. And so I'm trying to capture that through some real loose brushwork here. The last step in the painting now is to mix up some of my green with the ultramarine blue and nickel quinacridone gold, creating a green, and emphasizing the green foliage and stems of this painting. First, the stems, still using my Princeton Aqua Elite 12 round with a fine tip. I'm emphasizing the stems. I don't necessarily go all the way up and down the stems from top to bottom. Instead, I use kind of a technique called lost and found edges, where I kind of start a line, then stop and start it again, giving the impression of a line, but not necessarily painting the entire thing. Now, the green grass at the base of the flowers, I want to emphasize that. So I'm taking start with the green, then mix in a bit more of the quinacridone gold now, and painting over those areas. In some places, I want to soften the edges because, again, now I'm painting, this is wet on dry, so I will get pretty hard edges if I don't come back and soften some of those edges with a little bit of water. So I'm doing a combination of painting with the fine point tip, but also coming back with the side of the brush and laying down a bit more water and bigger strokes and softening some of the edges. Now I've taken just pure, thick nickel quinacridone gold and with large, loose strokes coming back and painting that over the areas I just painted. So this is a little bit more wet on wet now because this area is now a little wetter because I've put some paint down. And so this gold is going to spread out, create some soft edges, some nice contrasting colors between the green. I notice there's a bit of that quinacridone gold up in the bud area right below the flowers, so I'm also putting some of that color in this area as well. I'm really feeling like this painting is just about done, and I'm happy with it. And as usual, the rule is stop before you think you should is quite often a good maxim. Many times it's really easy to work a painting too long, too much, and overwork it. So sometimes it's good to stop a little bit before you think you should and maybe walk away for a day or so, or at least for an hour, and then come back and take a fresh look at it and see if you need to fix or change anything. But at this point, I'm pretty happy with what I see. So I'm ready here to add my signature and call this a finished painting. So now I take up my silver black velvet #1 liner brush and put in my signature. This is the only time I use this small of a brush. My rule is to always use the largest brush possible throughout my painting, and I don't use really small brushes like this very often, just when I'm putting in my signature like you see here. Overall, I feel really good about this painting. I've achieved the effects that I was looking for. I really like that light background. It appears as if light is coming from behind the flowers. So I'm ready to take off the tape. That's always a very satisfying part of the process. It gives a real finished look to the painting, as you see here. I encourage you to always look at your paintings and really identify the things that you really think worked about the paintings. I love the background here. I love the soft edges. I love the contrasting colors and the real loose feel to this painting. So I'm real happy with it. If you've enjoyed this, please leave a comment below. I would appreciate your feedback. Maybe let me know what other kind of flowers you'd love to see me paint in the future. It's a pleasure to do these videos for you, and I enjoy building this community. So thanks for watching. Have a great day.